Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Pensa, and this is the Love of Wisdom podcast. Thank you for joining my podcast. It's been some time since I've actually uploaded a lot of information. Unfortunately, recently I've actually had a lot of negative, hateful responses to my mother or from my mother on YouTube, and a lot of backlash from family members. So I have to disclose that publicly because it's been publicly shown on YouTube. And today's topic that we're going to discuss today is consciousness. Now, when you think of consciousness and you think of, reality and what constitutes reality, what is consciousness? What do you consider as the state of being? Like, some people call it a state, but what essentially defines consciousness and how is it used within the reality of the world that we live in? Now, what's interesting about this topic and this idea is that many people look at the idea or state of their being, of their lives, whether it be work, school, uh, being around their family, possibly being on the internet, on their phone. A lot of millennials like to be constantly absorbed in technology and their phone, but regardless, they live in a state of being, of their own reality, but this form of conscious state in which they themselves do an act, or they have some form of status of being that they're exposing themselves to. So when you think about this idea and you think about, okay, what is reality? What constitutes the state of being that I'm in? How do we look at that and look at that consciousness itself? So when we look at consciousness, the term consciousness literally has the word conscious in it. And what does it mean to be conscious? To be conscious essentially means to be aware. To be aware of whatever state you are in fully, and to be aware of the location and also the environment. And through sensations, at least in the physical conscious state that we live in as human beings, we are able to absorb and to self-reflect, and we're also able to analyze the situations that we're in currently. So when we look at conscious states and we look at our current conscious states in this world, we can see that there's a lot of correlations between them. But what we can also see is that there's also various states that exist in the universe itself, also within our minds. And when we look at each individual being, we can see that we all portray different forms of consciousness well, but we have to learn to correlate and understand how that consciousness influences the world and ourselves as individual people. Now, a lot of these ideas are philosophical, so I don't want to get too much in advance as to what consciousness is. There's also a lot of biochemistry, psychology, neuroscience, and other various physics that are involved, particularly quantum physics when it comes to states of consciousness within science. But I do want to speak about this idea that consciousness itself is very, very expansive. And our state of being is very extrapolative. It is not something that we can say is definitive. And I know many people will backlash me and will watch this video and wonder, what is Anthony saying? I can't believe he's saying this. Why is he talking about consciousness? What is this consciousness? And in addition to that, how is it not related to particularly a God, or a theistic God, or a monotheistic God, or polytheism, or multiple gods? But the essence is that consciousness itself is an extremely complicated topic. Now, when you look at religion and you look at the form of consciousness that people in religion have, particularly religions such as Christianity, you also have Judaism, Taoism, Hinduism, and the thousands of other religions across Western and Eastern portions of the world, those aspects of consciousness that exist are refined according to these religions, according to these beliefs, according to the ways of culture and how people correspond to these beliefs. And it's passed down from generation to generation in the form of historical texts or books, written or oral. Originally, it was oral, but today in our society, in the 21st century, it's now written. there are documentations that are handed and passed down from generation to generation, first orally and then written and then handed down. The Bible is a perfect example of an oral and written tradition that's been passed over tens of thousands of years through the various cultures that have been from the Jewish cultures, Hebrew cultures, Greek cultures, etc. And we have other examples aside from the Bible, but I'm just using that as an analogy to explain that these states of text were formed from conscious beings, people that had the ability to think, right? Moses, Abraham, Jesus, the 12 apostles, or 13 technically, but 12 that were with Jesus, Buddha, people in Hindu faith, people in African culture, people across every continent. I can name several names of people across various cultures, famous people who've had these famous texts, who are in very, very defined states of conscious awareness. These are the people that had created these texts and used them as a way to, many believe, manipulate people